What's happening, everybody? It's Sean with Reactions to the Classics, and today we got a reaction to the Swirling Eddies and their album Zoom Daddy, brought to us by a friend, longtime supporter and patron channel, Scott. Thank you, Scott. Always appreciate you. Appreciate all the patrons that make this thing go. If you'd like to support us anyway, check out the Patreon link below or the Patreon link that'll hit on the end screen. We put up videos every single day. We could not do it without you. All right. I don't really know much about the Swirling Eddies. I know a little bit about them, but Scott is a master at all of his write-ups. He's an authority on all of this. I did a bunch of research on this. There wasn't much research out there. So Scott's words are going to guide us, as they always do on his. And he says, after almost 2 years of submitting lists, this is the first full album I'm submitting for reaction. It's no secret that Terry Scott Taylor is at the top of my list for favorite artists. One reason being his seemingly endless supply of creative juice and how he chooses to present a message. From one song to the next, I've grown careful to avoid expectations based on what came before, both musically and lyrically, right? Always keep them guessing. Around 20 years ago, I gave this album, or CD, that's how we did it back in the day, boys and girls, to my cousin, who is 10 or 12 years older than me, a man who has for decades been a serious music lover and pretty picky when it comes to music he loves. At the time, he had a room in his home dedicated to the albums he had collected over the years, dating back to his teen years in the late 60s and early 70s. This room was wall-to-wall records and CDs, mostly comprised of a wide variety of artists, from classic rock to jazz to blues to obscure work that I wasn't familiar with. He has some Christian stuff, but not very much. Even back then in the late 90s, we shared a disdain for what the Christian market was generally producing. But after hearing this album, Zoom Daddy, he instantly and magically transformed into an avid fan of Terry Scott Taylor, whom he had never even heard of prior to this. Years later, we were discussing this record, and he told me that listening to this CD, quote, changed his life. High praise from my discriminating cousin. To choose a quintessential Terry Scott Taylor album is a perilous prospect. More than once, he has stated that his own personal favorite of his creations is 1986's Darn Floor Big Bite with his original band Daniel Amos, who are fantastic. While I love that album, I find myself going back to this one, Zoom Daddy from 1994, with his alternate band, the Swirling Eddies. Taylor fans will forever and joyfully debate which album is his best, but for me, this album represents a perfect storm wherein Taylor's songwriting and the band's musicianship came together to form a pretty perfect record, if anything can be pretty perfect. There isn't a dud to be found here, and the lyrical content is impeccably conceived and written. The Swirling Eddies' music is at times indistinguishable in style from that of Daniel Amos, but generally, the Eddies take a more whimsical approach with Taylor's sharp wit and below-the-surface perspective guiding the way. But Terry himself would be quick to point out that these albums aren't his creations alone. These guys worked together for many years and trusted one another, not only as fellow musicians, but as close friends. Musically, this album features vocals that are often complex and tightly layered throughout, with lots of backing lyrics and harmonies that, to really get all the subtleties, must be read along with the listening, which of course we always do here. This record, more than any other Eddies or Daniel Amos album I'm aware of, features noticeably aggressive drumming by David Raven, with lots of conspicuous percussion throughout. The Eddies' guitars are performed by Taylor and Jerry Chamberlain. Tim Chandler, who sadly passed away in 2018, plays his usual excellent and tasteful bass. Gene Eugene, one of the Lost Dogs, another band that Daniel Amos is involved in, and Greg Flesh contribute keyboards and some guitar as well. Finally, I have to add that my explanation of these lyrics are my impressions alone. If we had the advantage of Taylor and the boys explaining the intended vision of these songs, it just might differ wildly from my take on them. But that's the beauty of strong lyricism, isn't it? And that is very true. A good song allows me, the listener, to hear the message of the song and immediately apply it to my own context, often bringing significance that the writer never intended or conceived of. So in the listening, you might derive a meaning and application completely different than mine. If so, then I think Taylor and friends would consider the album, at least in that regard, a success. All right, before we get started, it's a reminder the music will not be in the video, but it'll be at a Vimeo link below. I definitely invite you to follow along with this. All right, now we'll start off with our album opener. I had a bad experience with the CIA, and now I'm going to show you my feminine side. So there's a story behind how all these songs came about, but Scott's about to tell us how these song titles came about. Terry Scott Taylor tells the following story about this song. Quote, one day in the studio, the Eddies were recording instrumental tracks that as yet had no lyrics to go with them. Taylor says they enjoyed doing this as a challenge to him in particular, as his assignment was to then go home with those tracks and write lyrics that fit the music. Bass player Tim Chandler presented Taylor with the added challenge of writing the lyrics around whatever title Chandler gave him, no questions asked. Taylor agreed, so Chandler, thinking the music they had just recorded had a certain spy movie feel to it, came up with the title of this song on the spot. As a result, Taylor was tasked with going home and writing a song around this title and further challenged himself to write a song that wasn't funny in spite of the title. As for the actual theme of the song, I'll leave it to your astute and insightful interpretive skills to elucidate for us the meaning of the song. Scott puts far too much faith in that in me. I'm pretty sure there's a deeper meaning here. So I just think that that's how they did all of the songs on this album when I was reading it. They wrote the music, right? So the arrangement, and then came up with the song title, and then told Terry Scott Taylor to go write it. So REM had a similar way that they wrote songs, and that the other guys came up with the arrangement and wrote the instrumental portion of it, and then they gave it to Michael Stipe, but not with a song title, right? And he had to come up with the lyrics, which there's a lot of great stories of how he did that. Sometimes he was pacing around a room in the studio and came up with them on the spot. But to do this with the song title is a whole different level of difficulty. So just another testament to how talented Terry Scott Taylor is. I'm going to have the lyrics up as always, which Scott said was super important. Thanks again, Scott. I had a bad experience with the CIA, and now I'm going to show you my feminine side. So definitely a different sound than what I'm used to from Terry Scott Taylor, almost a psychedelic thing in there. The lyrics are a little tough. I mean, we get the crown of thorns and a double cross in there at the end. So I think it's the ways of love is that's in the outro, but it's also in the pre-chorus, 1 and 2. There's 2 different pre-choruses. So I think there is like spy stuff. Obviously, it has to be like at least the words kind of intermixed in here because of the title. But I think it's kind of the ways of love. Like we kind of don't show ourselves to anybody, right? We show who we think they want us to be, but the ways of love don't really come through that. But I could be totally wrong. It was a different kind of song, man. It shows you the difficulty of writing a song based on the title. Next up, we have Mr. Sharky. Scott says, with this cut, Taylor and the Eddies moved from a cloak and dagger theme to the seamy world of lone sharks and tough guys. The metaphor is certainly open to interpretation, but for me, Taylor's imagery speaks to the lure of sin and its inevitable unveiling in the insidious slave master that it is, always promising, never delivering, forever demanding its pound of flesh. Scott is a fantastic writer, just like Terry Scott Taylor. All right, Mr. Sharky, also an interesting soundscape here. The bass work at the start of these first 2 songs are great. Then, this song, there's more bass in it than the first song, but guitar work is great. Almost has a little bit, it's 1994, so they're definitely influenced a little bit by the popular music of the day. Not that I want to speak for them, but it seems like they are even a little bit of Sublime, a little Primus in the underlying soundscape there. But I think Scott's pretty on with his metaphor of this song. So we open it, imagery speaks to the lure of sin and the difficulty of it, and like the choruses talk about that. Fatten up, boys, someday I'll stop feeding them. I'll stop needing them. I'll send them out to sea. Now Sharky's all concerned. He wants to know what's eating me. So I think Sharky must be the sin itself. At the very end of verse 1, like they come in and set up shop in his house for a few days. At the very end of verse 1, Sharky casually asked me if I like to surf. I think the threatening of like, I'm going to drown you. And I think, but maybe I'm influenced by Scott's interpretation, but it's a pretty darn good interpretation that's what this song's about. Next up, third track, in parentheses, disco, Love Grapes. Scott says, I've mentioned on previous lists that Taylor possesses a unique gift for presenting otherwise sticky truth in clever, palatable ways that avoids the preachiness of more straightforward Christian musicians. Here, Taylor tackles the subject of life's futility outside an intentional dedication to selflessness and love. Since I know his Christian worldview, I take it to mean a life that is devoted to following Jesus and the loving character that he seeks to build in his disciples. This is one of those tracks I have to read along with as I listen to it. A lot of information flies by and is lyrically clever and filled with metaphor that to miss any of it would be a shame. I'm trying to keep up. There's definitely a lot in the first 2 songs as well. Okay, disco, Love Grapes. Another very interesting song. Terry Scott Taylor's almost rapping in this song, right? But the guitar work and the bass work, which I mentioned, it starts out every song and kind of really rocks through this whole thing. So the instrumentation is really good. I don't even know what I think of this album yet, right? Like the vocal styles are so different. They're not bad. It's just I've never heard them, so I'm always like I don't know what I think. But I think this song was by far the most complex arrangement wise, and I also think it at least had, I don't want to even call it a chorus, but the Love Grapes, it sticks in your head after a while, and then in the backing, like they're doing a call and response, abide in me, I am the wine, love grapes. So the love grapes of Jesus Christ, and I mean even talk about, turning water into wine. There's a lot of Book of John allusions in here, but everybody's gas, say the best for last. Everybody's drunk, say the best for last. Stomp the Love Grape. So a very clever song, the way it's written. So for me, my fave so far. Next up, we have Nightmare at the Elks Lodge. Now, I've never been to an Elks Lodge. I once dated a girl a long, long time ago whose dad was in the Elks Lodge, and he would go there every single night. He sure loved it. But Scott says, the atmosphere shifts here as the Eddies take a look at human beings who have spent their lives in pursuit of this world's success and pleasures. Haven't we all at some point, right? The picture of a sad party of seniors who have danced the night away only to shuffle off to their respective destinations. The tone is reflective, as though we are seeing through the eyes of someone at the end of his life, looking back at his life only to see it as empty and hollow existence it actually was. Again, the implication here, as seen through a Christian and biblical lens, is that a life that is lived for oneself is a life that will end in emptiness, no matter how full it might have seemed at any given time along the way. Some wise words. Okay, Nightmare at the Elks Lodge. There is so much stuff going on arrangement-wise, right? Musically in this song. It's crazy because you've got almost some late 50s doo-wop in there in the backing vocals. Then you get a little part that reminds me where they're kind of way mixed to the back. Kind of reminds me of She's Leaving Home from the Beatles, the great McCartney and Lennon song off Sgt. Pepper. So it reminds me of that a little bit. Then we speed it up a little. You got some great drumming to end out. The drumming that Scott had mentioned in the beginning, like some really after it drumming to end it out. So a very complex song. And, you know, Terry Scott Taylor sounds great on this one, a totally different vocal style. I mean, these guys are really bringing all kinds of things. And I definitely see, it's living that life of regret, actually, when you're old, right? You look up and like, you know, the party's over and done, and angels, they tap at the windows. Their taxis are parked at the curb, and safely back home they will take you. If you would just say the word, and then some of the things that they embrace that they shouldn't have. But balloons are sad and deflated, the bridge, the dancing feet tired and numb. The banners and lights have all faded. The party is over and done. And then we get that the angels tapped at the windows again. So yeah, man, I really thought that was a well done song, both musically and lyrically. Next up, we have The Golden Girl of the Golden West. Scott said, I included this track on my Terry Scott Taylor list in June of 2021. Go check that out after this. There's a Christian playlist that has all of Scott's as well as some other patrons lists in there. With barely a trace of any spiritual significance, this song takes a clever look at the state of California. And by state, quote, I mean condition. I realize I'm risking that many of your listeners are not from California, so a lot of these references might fly right by. But I grew up in Southern California in the San Francisco Bay Area and find the song to be near genius in the way Taylor weaves together so many California characteristics and references. Yet also woven into the lyrics are references to many of the sports teams in California, the widely varied political views, and clever listing of the broad spectrum of religious expressions found in the liberal state. One of the more clever songs from Terry Scott Taylor. I remember this background of the song. I don't remember the song itself, but I do remember this background. The Golden Girl of the Golden West. Also another song that musically, arrangement-wise, is just very complex and very well done. The guitar work on here, low-key, is great. And there's just so much stuff in here. I'm not really going to go into all the lyrics, but there's just a lot of brilliant stuff in here about California, right? Verse 2, for example. She's a powder snow bunny and a painted desert rat, an avocado model in a boysenberry hat. She's our buffed and spangled banner. She's our sedentary fat. She's hungry, cold, and homeless, and she's luxury's lap. And then it goes into that chorus. She's a golden girl of the West, a lipo-sucking diva with a saline chest, right? A fake person physically, right? She's the golden girl of the Golden West. And, you know, there's just a lot of, you get the na in there in the hook. She's a corporation raider on the sports bar beat, a giant dodgy 49er with two athletes' feet. She's a warrior and an angel. So, you know, you've got just in there, you know, San Francisco 49ers, the Oakland Raiders of that time, right? Now they went to Los Angeles, back to Oakland. Now they're Las Vegas Raiders. She's a warrior, so the Golden State Warriors, the Angels, the old California Angels, the Los Angeles, and now the Anaheim Angels, and a ram in heat. She's a drunken Clipper captain with a silicone leak. So just all kinds of brilliant lyricism in here. Shows you Terry Scott Taylor's true talents. Except we have Sweet Mother of God. Scott says, here the boys tackle the issue of the Virgin Mary and the beliefs about her within the Catholic Church. They give us a rapid-fire listing of the characteristics attributed to her by Rome. But the concluding line of the song reveals that maybe, just maybe, we Protestants, just by making a bit too much of an issue we consider controversial, even heretical. So I'll be interested to see this, because for me, the interpretation of the Bible, this is heretical to worship somebody on the same level as Jesus Christ. So I'll be curious here where this song takes me. Sweet Mother of God. I read on here, I don't know if this is true or not, but it was in several parts in the lyrics and the breakdown. I was reading them that Terry Scott Taylor converted to Eastern Orthodox either in the late 80s, somewhere in the 90s, and no one really seemed to know. And that would kind of explain this song a little bit, where he looked at Mary in a little different way, a little more reverential way, which I'm not saying you shouldn't look at her. Reverential may be a bit strong, but like I identify greatly with Paul and Peter in the Bible, like greatly, right? But I don't revere them. I respect them. I think of them as great because they were God's chosen instruments, but they're great because they were God's chosen instruments. So I don't revere them like I do Jesus, God, or the Holy Spirit. So it's a complicated thing. And some people may think you're just kind of splitting hairs, but I don't. I think when you pray to Mary and hold up Mary, you're crossing a line that the Bible just simply says you shouldn't, but we can all agree to disagree here, because his very last line is, I'm not so sure that anything's wrong with her. I think, yeah, we got to be careful as Christians not to cross a line and actually like say bad stuff about Mary or try to put her down. And that's what happens, right? If you shouldn't do this, and I'm going to go the exact opposite. It's like when somebody's going for an award, or who's the best band, or who's the best this, whatever it is, right? And we're like, oh, this one's the best, and someone thinks this one's the best. So instead of saying that person's great, you're like, oh no, that person's horrible, and here's why. Well, no, you just don't believe they're on this level. So I think it's kind of the same thing here, if that makes any sense. But a good song, an interesting song. All right, we'll finish out the first half of the album with The Twist. Scott says, another song that I've included on a previous list as well, is it being the very first track I submitted for a reaction. A reaction Trey handled quite nicely, having never heard of Taylor or his bands. And I remember that. I never watched it or listened to it, but I create all the thumbnails on the channel, so all this stuff always rings a bell. The song is written from Jesus' perspective as he hangs on the cross and addresses his disciples who are engulfed in confusion and fear, as you can well imagine. Perhaps the most honest and poignant song from Jesus' perspective I have encountered. Wow. The Twist, a tremendously written song, right? I mean, as Scott says, from the perspective of Jesus hanging on the cross. Hang on, believe there's nothing up my sleeve. I've got no magic tricks to save the day. Put down the gun, you're not helping anyone. And I'm not about to run or back away. Don't walk the fence and come to my defense. Don't need fair-weathered kinds of friends around. So watch and pray as a traitor's kiss betrays, right? Judas, of course. And rest your feet of clay on shaky ground. And the chorus, and look me in the face, at least what's left of it. Tell me you still love me just a little bit, or nail me down, break the skin, hard enough to do me in. But don't leave me hanging, dying and twisting, or dying and dangling, twisting in the winds. The twist in there. Here, touch my side, let doubt be crucified. What a play on words there, right? Nail with your wounded pride to love's grim altar. Here, taste my flesh, my bloody humanness. I am no phantom guest, no skinless martyr. So taste and feel, there's nothing to conceal. You always knew the deal was sacrifice. Stand up, be strong when all you've got is gone. I left the light turned on in paradise. So lots of great stuff in there. Like I always told you, this is what it's going to be. They just didn't understand it was going to be this, right? Even though he told them, I'm no phantom guest, no skinless martyr. I really am real, and I suffered. I'm both fully man and fully God. And boy, that is a topic that is complicated to comprehend. Next up, we got God Went Bowling. Scott says, in his whimsical way, Taylor tackles the mess we make of this world in our lives. We are left to ourselves in spite of God's original creative intention. For us, we went down our own way and threw into chaos the perfect world with which God entrusted us. But like God, Taylor thankfully doesn't leave it there. God descended into our chaos in the person of Jesus, entered into the nonsense and darkness with us, and brought a remedy that only he could provide. Why would he do such a thing? Taylor makes God's motivation clear at the close of the track. All right, God Went Bowling. It almost sounded like an accordion at the start. There's probably some play on the keyboards, but it almost sounded like an accordion. But God went bowling, got the ball rolling, suspended it in the air. So all of this stuff, and then God made a barrel out of slings and arrows, filled it up high with the apples of his eyes. Now the grub worm is snacking on all we are lacking, aiming his shots at the core that he wrought. So basically, God created us, and then the devil, the enemy, comes and tries to take all that from us. And then the chorus and the fracas and filth and the fire and the flood and the trash and the tumors, the rash and the rub. All us tag team wrestlers, shout out to wrestling, right? Get stuck in the mud and wrestle against not the flesh and the blood. God set a table for the blind and disabled and all this different stuff, right? Praises and curses, see the pillages and wonders. A stumble, a fall, see the great free-for-all. Now the rattlesnake is coined, so here comes Satan back, right, in a little bit different form. Round the sheets we are soiling, he strikes while we're sleeping and sows what we're reaping. And so it's just, the bridge, we want an infinite meddler, a quick fix-it quick man. But he gets off his high horse, gets dirt on his hands, and he woos us like a lover through each bloody secession and hangs on the cross with the rest of creation. So similar to previous songs, Jesus came here in flesh, truly in flesh, and suffered and died for us so we don't have to. So really good song. Next up, we got Multi-Purpose Man. Scott says, one topic Taylor returns to with some regularity is human nature, flawed, corrupted, confused, insecure human nature. And he points to himself as often as he looks to others. Here he discusses the human tendency, even a need, to be all things to all people. I think that's something that all of us struggle with at times, right? I often think of our world in terms of people wandering around in the dark, looking for something, anything to grab onto that makes some sense and feels even a little bit secure. A big part of that wandering is our need to appear to others as the person they expect us to be. As a result, we split ourselves into a variety of personas at any given moment, equal parts callous and sensitive, aloof and personable, smart and ignorant, worldly wise and spiritual. We can also add the current confusion we're experiencing with genders and orientations and the fluid nature of these perspectives. All of this illustrates our need for an identity rooted in our relationship with Jesus Christ, who provides us with a firm anchor point that keeps us focused and secure in who we are as children of God. Scott has tons of great write-ups. That paragraph might have been the best one I've ever seen him write. Like, that's fantastic. Totally agree that whenever I see someone who's lost in whatever manner and trying to fill it with something else, I always tell my wife, Gina, it's a cliched Christian thing, and I try to stay away from cliched Christian things, but it's true. He's got a Jesus, or she has got a Jesus-sized hole in their heart. They're trying to fill it with something that only he can fill, right? And so that's why they like this, and then they chase something else, and no, I'm not that, because you're never going to feel who you are until you're become one with Jesus, which can only be brought forth by the working of the Holy Spirit. That doesn't mean you're going to feel great all the time, even when that happens. All of us can attest to that. But there's a big difference in being secure, the security that Scott talks about here. Okay, I've preached enough. Let's go. Multi-Purpose Man, another extremely well-written song. He starts out verse 1 and verse 2 in the same way, right? He starts it out with, it's a little different in the words that he's using, but insert flap A into slot 2B, roll me, roll me, roll me toward my destiny. I'm a room for love. I'm a factory for war. So all the, like what Scott was talking about in his write-up, right? We can be all these things to different people. Whatever you need me to be when I'm in that room or with that person, I can be, and then I can flip that switch and be the total opposite to somebody else. But then in that, you lose yourself, right? You don't want to totally outright offend people if you can avoid it, but you don't also want to be something that you're not, right? A hungry artist knocking at the rich man's door. And he just kind of goes, I'm your very own living multi-purpose man. Your cowardly lion and your blemished lamb. And I'll be saved and I'll be damned. I'm your very own living multi-purpose man. Then fold panel 3 along the dotted line. So just all these different things. A discouraging word in a mercenary's throat, a hangman's noose on an old frayed rope, a zephyr wind in a paper boat. And it just goes on. It's really good. I could read the whole thing to you. But verse 4 is pretty good. Like the very last verse is 4 lines. Fill me up, fill me up. I'm a white trash can, a Ku Klux clown, and it also ran. Yeah, I'm yesterday's news. I'm a small footnote, a DJ caring less about this song I wrote. So, as this album's went on, Terry Scott Taylor's songwriting has just risen to the top of the. There's a really good guitar riff on that song. And throughout this album, the instrumentation has been diverse and very well done. Next up, we got Pyro Sets a Wildfire. Scott says, when I was in the pastoring world, a world I'm about to rejoin after 13 years off, which is awesome, I discovered within myself a skeptical streak that was always there, but I hadn't really recognized until I was immersed in some pretty sketchy church situations. And I lived that out as well, and so this is probably some wisdom to me too. Every now and then that skepticism lapses into outright cynicism. I conditioned myself to question motives, even when motives were revealed to be pure and honest. While this became a bit of a problem for me among my pastoral peers, it would balloon into a real issue when I would vocalize that skepticism regarding all manner of questionable decisions that were camouflaged in spiritual, even biblical language. Even though I was often, but certainly not always, correct in my assessments, some of my more combustible observations were rarely met with thankfulness and enthusiasm. I think Scott and I were living parallel lives in all of this. It was as though I had thrown a wet blanket over the proceedings. This is the tone of this song. Here, Taylor and friends express the inevitable results of saying the obvious thing that no one wants to acknowledge openly. Saying out loud the emperor isn't wearing any clothes is, in the view of this track, tantamount to setting a wildfire in the middle of an otherwise peaceful setting, even though that peace might be falsely gained and maintained through brutish intimidation and spiritual manipulation. Wow, what a great write-up. Pyro Sets a Wildfire. I think this is the first time I've heard on here that could actually have been a hit in 1994 on the radio, right? This song is fantastic. The melody, all of it. I mean, the message of it's great, but if you're not listening to the message, like, it's got a catchy hook on there. The guitar riff is fantastic. The lyrics are great. You know, I never meant to trip the minefield hidden here in paradise. If I played my role as, of course, if I played my role as diplomat, you knew it wasn't just an act. I couldn't stand to stand in back. A faded little wallflower. I may be taking too much on. Naivety and youth is gone, but at least the juice is still turned on. I'm dancing on a live wire. I've summoned up a thundercloud, but always meant to do you proud. Still certain things are not allowed, like setting off a wildfire. I got into it a little bit there, right? Because that's how he sings it. It's a fantastic song, man. Might be my favorite Terry Scott Taylor song I've ever heard, as far as from just a catchiness musical type, not necessarily lyricism. The lyricism's good, but I mean, he has some really, really fantastic ones. But man, this song's fire. Next up, something we could all use, some friendly advice. Scott says, once again, Taylor smuggled some important advice through some lighthearted lyrics in rapid-fire fashion. He leaves us with much to consider, perhaps an ideal song for those considering what to tackle for their next New Year's resolutions. Some friendly advice, all kinds of things in here, you know, that kind of rhyme with each other. And I'm never usually a big fan of that in the songwriting realm. And I kind of wasn't in here either, but I mean, I get what he's getting at. It just kind of wasn't for me, but you know, I get what he's trying to get to. So, you know, of course, something that you wouldn't ordinarily do, something just a little bit different for you, like forgiving a friend and an enemy too. You'll feel better when your little day is through. So, you know, just like smoke a cigar, drive a sports car, read the good book, try a skyhook. Shout out to Kareem, right? Call your mother, kiss your father, tell him you love him, clean your oven, that kind of stuff. Like, it's not really my thing. Lots of songwriters do it. Terry Scott Taylor's a masterful songwriter, so who am I to judge that? Just saying it's not really my thing on this one. We got 3 songs left, and I'm going to play the next 2 back to back. So we got Art Carney's Dream and Holy, Holy, Holy. Scott says, well, these 2 tracks blend together into one long song and seem to communicate 2 different thoughts. They are compatible when seen as a bigger picture. Art Carney's Dream is depicted as just that, a dream or narrator's relating that shows a glimpse of heaven and his misconception about exactly who may and who may not end up there. It bears shades of C.S. Lewis's dream novel, The Great Divorce, which depicts a bus ride to heaven and the various characters he encounters on that trip back in the old days when I used to preach and lead my men's groups. I would say about that in heaven, I think we're going to be surprised about how few people are there and who is there and who is not there, right? You know, how did you get here? Where's so-and-so? Oh my. Contrasting this depiction is Holy, 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 a more celebrative look, not so much of heaven and his right to belong there, but at holiness and the unexpected places we may find it. Here Taylor recognizes the holiness of God, not only in the expected places, the loftiness of heaven and angels, but in everyday encounters we all share. His message, I think, is that when God's hand touches anything, that thing is instantly elevated to the holy, by virtue of even those common elements bearing the fingerprints of the Almighty. A note here about holiness itself. It's a common word among the religious, whether Christian or Muslim or Jewish or any other religious tradition. The biblical understanding of holiness is that the word simply means separate, and in reference to God and anything he touches, it means more specifically altogether separate and unique. But when applied to God, it carries the understanding that his separateness is so because he is altogether righteous and perfect. So with this track, Taylor recognizes the transforming effect God's fingerprints have on the mundane, the common things, even something so common and flawed as us humans, who are in God's eyes made holy as we surrender ourselves to his rule in our hearts and lives. Sorry for the sermon. Don't ever be sorry, Scott. I need the sermon. All right, a little double feature there, Art Carney's Dream and Holy, Holy, Holy. So Art Carney, of course, being in The Honeymooners, which is probably way before me. It was way before my time, but I've watched the show. And it just, everything they saw, he didn't feel like he's worthy of heaven, so he's sneaking around watching everything that is going on. I didn't care for the arrangement and style of that one, but it was a really good song, whereas I much more preferred the Holy, Holy, Holy style and song itself, although the lyrics aren't necessarily better than Art Carney's Dreams. Art Carney's Dreams lyrics are probably just a step even higher, but yeah, I mean, Holy, 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 Golden Street of Light in New Jerusalem, see what in my dreams at night she had always been in a wedding dress of white and crowned with seraphim. Now she's putting the magic bite on me once again. It's holy, and still a kiss. I believe it's holy and still the moonlight. It's holy and still the wine and bread. Holy, holy, holy. And the way Terry Scott Taylor sings that holy, 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 and the way they kind of enunciate it out in the mixing is quite nice. So a good double feature there of two different views of heaven. So I like the way that Scott wanted us to do it all in one. We're going to finish it with the title track, Zoom Daddy. Scott says a recurring theme of this album is brought home in this final track. Here, Taylor laments his limitations of perceiving God and all the circumstances that causes those blind spots. He relates the routine protests we hear of the pain and misery of war and disease and child abuse, all the way down to trivial concerns like weight gain and annoyingly flat Coca-Cola. Yet in the end, his decision to surrender would be a split second, fast as lightning, hence the Zoom Daddy refrain. Isn't that the case for any and all who come to Jesus? Once our reasons are brushed aside, we're left with our own self-absorbed reluctance to surrender, a hesitation that once we're on the other side of the decision, will seem like a silly dragging of our heels that has kept us from the joy of a relationship with God, a relationship and reconciliation we had really thirsted for all along. Good stuff. All right, the title track, Zoom Daddy, and yeah, just kind of showing through the lyrics. Also, really good writing. You know, the verse one, zoom over celestial walls and make it in time for lunch. Yeah, we're going to have a ball when miracles spike the punch. We get down into chorus 3, you got that child's abused, those eyes are bruised, all concerned when you return under a spell. Feeling like hell, disease and war can't take no more, which goes right into that outro, Zoom Daddy, many times, like in the backing vocals. No pain, no fear, the coast is clear, the end is near, the time is here. Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. So a good way to finish this one off. And that's going to bring me to my favorite tracks. And there's a lot of tracks on there. There's 14 tracks. I'm going to go with honorable mentions. I'll go with Disco Love Grapes, Nightmare at the Elks Lodge, and The Golden Girl of the Golden West, and God Went Bowling. My faves are going to be The Twist, and obviously you heard my high praise for it, Pyro Sets a Wildfire. Now I'll go to my overall score. It's always tough on first listens to an album, right? Because there's a lot of diversity on this album, especially on the front half of it. You know, and I do got to throw a shout out to David Raven on the drums, and Greg Flesh, occasional guitar and piano, Gene Eugene, most of the keyboards and piano, and Tim Chandler on that bass, as well as Terry Scott Taylor on the guitars and the vocals, obviously in his writing. But a really, really well put together band and a fantastic musicianship on this album in particular. Every one of those guys had a chance to shine somewhere. So on first listen to this album, I'm going to be at a 7.0 out of 10. It's long. I'm usually not a fan of 14 songs or 63 minutes. And I think almost every album suffers from that, but not every album. So on first listen, it suffers a little bit from being so long, but songs are well constructed. The writing is fantastic. The vocal styles are quite varied, and I don't know what I think of that yet. You know, like I said, you got to listen to it a lot. For example, Scott, who brought this album, has listened to it who knows how many times, right? And I've listened to it the first time, so it's always tough giving a score. But coming in right now, I'll be at a 7.0. Let me know what you think of this album. What are your favorites below? What else should I check out? From the Swirling Eddies or Terry Scott Taylor, if I haven't already. I mean, Scott is the authority on this. He's guided me down the right path. And until next time, guys, I will see you.